You joined the Air Force when?
Right out of high school. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college, so I joined the Air Force to get the GI Bill. And I told my recruiter I want to be a spy.
And action. Welcome back to Show and Tell. I'm Billie, and today I have a most unusual guest in that her collection is something that is not quite knitting related. We're talking about Mexican tourist jackets, and my guest is a woman named Kathryn Riser, who has, from what I understand, a very significant collection of these jackets. I'm sure that we're going to get into a dialogue, Kathryn, about why you collect them and the history of these very unusual jackets, one of which I assume you're wearing.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us where you're located. You're in New Mexico, right?
Yes, we live in southwestern New Mexico, between Deming and Silver City, New Mexico. And we previously lived in Tucson for 40 years, but we purchased a WPA stone schoolhouse. And my husband's an architect and builder, and so he totally renovated it to make it look like a Western National Park lodge. And we just love it. It's in a beautiful valley called the Mimbres Valley.
WPA is near and dear to my heart because I'm an Art Deco lover. I would love to see the whole house. I bet it's like adorable everywhere. So yeah, I mean, without further ado, we should talk about these jackets. What are they? Let's start with that. What describes a Mexican tourist jacket?
Well, they're made of wool felt, and depending upon the age, if it's from the 40s or 50s, the 40s they used appliques, and the early 50s were appliques, but then they started using wool embroidery. And typically, the jacket that I have on right now, it's from the early 50s because it has the appliques, but it also has a collar, which the 40s pieces did not have a collar. So they typically decorate the front, the back, the sleeves with whimsical Mexican villages and animals, cacti. They wanted to promote a tranquil view of Mexico to attract tourists there.
Because American gringos thought that there were banditos everywhere, huh?
Absolutely, with Pancho Villa's raids and other uprisings in Mexico, Americans thought of it as a lawless country.
So the little bit that I've read about the beginnings of it was the United States was trying to foster tourism to Mexico after World War II, when gas rationing was lifted and people could actually drive their cars across the border to this somewhat exotic and colorful locale for us. But, tell us more about like why people started making these, who was making them?
Well, with the demise of the travel restrictions, it enabled people to easily travel to Mexico, and they promoted it as an exotic land that was right next door to you. And movie stars started to go down there, and you see movies from the 40s that were filmed in Mexico. And people gave up a lot during World War II, and it seemed like a gloomy time, even with fabrics. They were limited in what they could purchase in fabrics. And so these Americans come to Mexico, and they see this land of gaiety, bright colors, brilliant flowers, beautiful embroidery. And this promoted a lot of handicrafts for tourists because of the large influx. So there was a lot of silver work, ponchos, serapes, and of course the Mexican tourist jackets and the circle skirts for women.
Now, about your collection, do you have one of the largest collections that we know of?
Well, I don't know what other people have. I've been collecting for 35 years.
Wow.
So I have over 140 jackets, and I've worn each one. And I can tell you, every single time I've worn a jacket, I get stopped by men, women, children wanting to know more about these jackets.
Of course. I mean,
They're very different and they've never seen them before. But you know, a lot of women will come up to me and say, you know, my mother had one of these jackets, or I remember that I had a jacket like this when I was a child, and I don't know what happened to it. I get that constantly.
my college roommate, my freshman year, had one. I'm sure it must have belonged to her mother. I don't know, unless she bought it at a vintage shop back then. This was in the early 70s. I tried
Mhm.
to reach out to her, but I haven't heard back from her. I wanted to know if she still has it. I remember it somewhat well. She let me wear it once. It was an ivory color. It wasn't so garish. It didn't have bright colors, but it was just so unique. I had never seen anything like it before, and I've never seen anyone else in New York since then wearing one. So I'm really anxious to see some of what you've got. I know we're not going to see all 140, but is the collection divided in some way? Like, do you have them separated by colors, or are there particular artists or special motifs that fall into categories, like some that have the dancing couple? I know you're going to talk about them. I mean, how do you
Well,
categorize the collection?
well, I have, you know, 1940s, 1950s. I have the El Charo and La China Poblana, the dancing couple, also on the back. I have some that I call as outliers because they're very different. And I don't know if the maker did, you know, if it was a separate maker from the companies that sold these jackets and just having the freedom to create what she wanted. But I also have some that are just incredible, that they're, I've seen no others like them. The workmanship is just exemplary on these, and I picked out a few to show these also.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I think we should get started. And as we look at them, I'm sure questions will crop up.
Okay.
And
Well, I'm going to
share whatever information you want.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with the 1940s. So I'm going to move back so you can see my jackets here. So the typical 1940s jacket, it didn't have a collar. And the appliques were somewhat 3D. They tended to show these donkeys with a pack on them, which is padded, so it stands out from the other applique. They always did the sleeves, and every jacket has 2 patch pockets with the appliques on them. Now in the 1940s, for some reason, they always wanted to show a night scene. You see the moon, some stars, and there was always a plant of some sort, a palm tree, and usually a figure in them. So, and they were always, all the jackets have the cross stitching down the front, around the sleeves, around the neckline, and on the bottom. And they're usually done in 2 different colors. And I'll just show you a couple other examples of this. So this is also in 1940s. And you see again, the donkeys have this 3D pack on them. And the stitching is the 2-color, red and white in this case. The back also has a plant, the moon and stars, and a figure of someone sitting, and also usually a little building.
So it's very
This,
similar. It's very similar to the first one.
yes, and you'll see this is my third example, which yellow is a very unusual color. Now, normally the main colors that they used were red, green, and blue. And what was learned was that the Saltillo region of Mexico, which is near Monterrey, they carded and created the wool, spun it, and they dyed it grass green, blood red, and deep turquoise. But yellow and black and ivory showed up later. So again, you see that the appliques, on this one in particular, it didn't have the donkey, it showed a home instead of house. But again, the back features a plant and a figure and a moon. This one also, oddly enough, has little flowers instead of stars. And this one, it's from Tasco. There's a label, I don't know if you can see it. It says Bernice, let's see, Bernice de Tasco. So this was one of the few where the jacket was recognized by the maker. Now, this is another type of jacket that came out probably the early 50s. So it was still incorporating the collarless design, but they started to create dual colors. And this one, this is a rainbow yarn that was used. And again, you see in this case, the cross stitching was one color. And a very varied view of a Mexican village with a mountain, someone carrying probably a bundle of rugs. Now, one thing that I've discovered is some people feel that this is a controversial issue with these jackets, where they're showing a sleeping Mexican, that some people feel that it was demeaning to the Mexican culture, that it showed that Mexicans were lazy. But in fact, what it represented was a siesta, which Americans were not familiar with, and many are still not really familiar with it today. So it's not a demeaning symbol. It was just part of their life that they were trying to represent.
Right. In any country where there's a hot climate, equatorial places, people need to rest. It's hot and it's hard to work, especially if you're doing work out of doors and the sun is beating down on you. So he had his sombrero on, and I think he's entitled to take a little siesta. Absolutely.
Again, now this is another one from the early 50s. And I guess they were trying to just be different. So this one also has some fringe besides the two colors that were used. And actually black is my favorite color of the jackets because it really makes the colorful embroidery pop when you wear it. So again, you've got symmetrical designs on the sleeves. Everything is symmetrical with these jackets, and they're all open front. The back on this one, again, shows village life and plants. They love to show the palm trees. Now this is later 50s because it has the one-piece fabric collar. Again, it's a two-tone jacket. These are rather rare, but the embroidery on this one is really spectacular.
Oh,
It's
wow.
of a bullfight, but you can see the workmanship. It's really intricate. It's one of the most intricate jackets that I own.
The bullfight theme seems unusual.
Well, you know, in Mexico, they still have bullfights. So just from the Spanish tradition.
But amongst the jackets that you're showing, that's the first one with a bullfight. Are there others with bullfight, or is that kind of unique?
I have at least 4 of them with a bullfight. I'm just showing a, you know, a small sample of what I have. But one thing I wanted to talk about while I have these jackets is that there's no concrete evidence, but they believe that it was indigenous women that did all the embroidery, that it was a cottage industry where they stitched the individual pieces and then sent them back to the factory to sew everything together. And this is traditional because the Spanish nuns that date back to the 16th century taught young Mexican women how to embroider, so that they made samplers and altar cloths and clerical fabrics for the priest and also for wealthy landowners. So it's inherent in the society, the actual embroidery. Now this one, again, it's probably from about the mid to late 50s, and its theme is a harvest. If you look on the back, you can see they're harvesting corn and bundling it, and then you have the farmer with his bowl and a cart carrying.
Sorry, these would be strictly for export, right? No Mexican women would be able to wear this in the heat there, right?
Exactly. This was made strictly for the tourist. And the one thing that the Mexican women did incorporate, which I also have a collection of, is the Mexican circle skirts. They initially did not wear those skirts, but eventually it became part of their fashion also. Now, this is one of my favorite. It's an ivory colored, but it's showing a potential murder scene on the back. You've got a lover kissing his woman and a jealous lover hiding behind a cactus with a big knife. And whenever I've worn this jacket, this gets about the most comments, like, why are you wearing a potential murder scene on your jacket? But I think it's great. It's really well done and very different. If they were trying to promote tranquility in Mexico, I don't know why they showed this particular scene on a jacket. The front, you know, is just the iconic symbols, horseshoes, rugs, but this was really unusual. Again, another controversial issue with these jackets is cockfights. And here you see men betting on a cockfight, which again, it was just part of Mexican culture. So you see these on several jackets, even child's jackets that I'll show you a little bit later. But again, this is probably mid to late 50s. It's got the one-piece collar. It's using the rainbow thread, which I think was used in the later part of the 1950s.
You've mentioned one-piece collar a couple of times. Are there collars that are not one piece?
No, they're all one piece. It's just the difference between collarless and collars. And this is another example of a cockfight. I'm not quite sure what kind of chickens these are. They're unfamiliar to me, but it's definitely a cockfight. And there's a lot of cacti on these, which is iconic to Mexico, and the agaves. So they did a pretty good job of representing the spines on these plants. Now, as we move later into the 50s, they started switching to doing some floral work, as well as switching from the wool thread to more of a polyester thread, and it was machine made. I mean, it's beautifully done, but it was machine created. And again, anything made on a black jacket is just, it really pops in color.
That seems more for like evening wear.
Yeah, it's very elegant,
Mm-hmm.
to say the least. Now, also in the 1950s, the very late 50s, they started to create these Mandarin collar jackets. Again, looking for a different design. And they used the machine stitching. This looks like, it could be silk, but I would guess it's probably some sort of polyester thread. And it was always a floral design and only done on the front and the sleeves. The back has no work at all on it.
I have to ask you a question about the fact that many of them are wool. Primarily, I'm a knitter, and most of the people who watch this podcast, I believe, are knitters as well. We're always consumed with the unmentionable pest that
Yes.
loves to eat wool. Do you have any secrets for how you protect these?
Well, I have a cabinet that my husband put cedar in. So I store them in this cabinet, and we've sealed it so that no insects can get in there. But no matter what, if I acquire a new jacket, I do not introduce it to the others until I put it in the freezer for 2 weeks. And so I just put it in a plastic bag, put it in the freezer, and that would kill anything that's in there. And that's regardless of any type of vintage wool that you would buy. I never put that in with my other wools until it's been in the freezer.
I'm laughing because today in New York, it's a crisp 25 degrees. And my husband put his bin of wool sweaters out on our terrace. It hasn't been this cold yet this winter. So I was like, put your stuff out there. Let's make sure if there's anything that we don't want, this will kill it.
And you have to do that. If you purchase one of these jackets today, my advice is, if they say there's little holes in them, you're never going to be able to repair it to make it look right. And that means, there could be still some moth eggs in there. And also, if a lot of people say, well, there's some minor stains, but it doesn't detract from the beauty of the jacket. Well, I can tell you firsthand, you will never get rid of those stains. So I would pass on any jackets that have stains mentioned or moth holes. I mean, if there's 1 or 2 little pin holes, you can probably repair that so that it doesn't show, but be very cautious when you're purchasing these jackets with a description, and pass on these stains or gaping holes in the jackets.
I was going to ask you, but about how you go about acquiring them, but let's come back to that because you're on a groove with showing them. So carry on. I didn't mean to stop you.
No. There was a company, a specific manufacturer by the name of LabMex, so LAB-MEX, and they seem to concentrate on Aztec designs versus the village scenes. And this is one of their jackets where they're showing Aztec. And I don't know who these creatures are, if it's, I don't even know how to pronounce it correctly, Quetzal.
Quetzalcoatl or something. I forget from when I was in Mexico so long ago.
But this one also has the puff sleeves, which many jackets have these puff sleeves, and they're an indication that they're from the late 40s or early 50s. Now, this is another Lab Mex. This one has the label Lab Mex still attached. This one is a little bit different in that these are actually patches that have been sewn on, that were embroidered first and then sewn on. I've never seen this before. This is, so this was one I had to add to my collection because I'd not seen the patches. Again, this is some Aztec god of some sort.
This is completely different. It has panels in the sleeves. It has, like, it's not just a one-piece sleeve. There's a seam going up the back. And I also noticed there's facing. I don't remember seeing facing in the others. The
No, this is,
ones.
and I'm not sure if this wool is a much heavier wool than the other jackets also. It's a very thick, very substantial. But again, and it's taking the design of the 40s with no collar. It has the, the dual colored cross stitching.
Whoa, this color.
This is a very unusual color. And this is a company called Berty, Berty. And they made several jackets of this design with a pot of flowers, musical instruments at the bottom. And then they have the Charo couple. And this is the nationalistic symbol of Mexico. The Charo, there's two different styles. This is the Berty style where they're actually kind of turned, the man is facing his back and the woman is facing forward. And the man, the Charo was dated back to the conquistadors and the wealthy landowners who enjoyed horseback riding. And they wore very elaborately embroidered outfits. And El Charro actually means flashy or flare. And the La China Poblana, this is based on peasant outfits from Andalusia and Toledo. And it's always shown now as the iconic outfit that Mexican women wore in movies and fiestas. And even Frida Kahlo has clothing similar to this if you see some of the photos of her fashion. This is another aspect of the dancing couple. And there's several of these that are, very large that are appliqued on the back. And in this one, which is I collected because the woman had red hair, which is unusual. Usually the couples both have black hair. Now I had a jacket where both of the couple had blonde hair, but I had a friend who so desired that particular jacket because she was blonde that I ended up giving it to her.
Don't put this one away yet. Wait, come back. This is the first one I've seen that says Mexico on it.
Yes.
And also those are sequins, right?
That's correct. So in this, you'll see that in these, that there's a lot of sequins added, a lot of detailed embroidery. There's always a bracelet. Usually there's some sort of a necklace that's either beaded or this one is a cross. And then the hair, the braids are always 3D and they stand out and tied at the bottom.
It's spectacular.
And then, the front is a little bit plainer. It just shows the patch pockets and towards the bottom. But again, I really love the black in showing the colors. Now this is similar, with a large couple on the back. Again, there's Mexico, floral sequins, the long 3D braids. She also has a cross necklace. But this was an actual store in Ciudad Juarez called the House of Oppenheimer. That's very rare that you can find store labels on these jackets, because most of them were sold at resorts or just little stalls in towns.
I did read something about that label. Let me see if I can find it in my notes. The House of Oppenheim. And Oppenheimer, yeah. Oppenheimer. And then I heard that there was one other label, Garcia Leal Hermanos.
Yes. Well, there were several manufacturers. Lopez was a popular one. Garcia Leal, Navarro, Carolina. But the sad thing is there's no information at all about these companies. I've looked everywhere. I've asked other people who own these jackets, and there's no information at all. They just went off into oblivion, I guess. I don't know. I've been trying to find a museum venue to exhibit these jackets, because I feel that there'd be a real draw to see these along with the circle skirts, based on the response that I get whenever I wear one.
Well, I'm hoping that some people in New York may see it and pass along. The Fashion Institute of Technology here, FIT as it's commonly known, they have a little museum where they do very small but wonderful exhibits. They had shirts that belonged to Nelson Mandela.
Oh, yes.
Which were, very beautiful, but they often do unusual things. So this would maybe be right up their alley, but you're not looking to donate your collection to a museum. You would just like them to exhibit it?
No, I would donate to them whatever they would be willing to exhibit, because I would like to have some of these live on in posterity and be well taken care of.
Well, let's see. I mean, maybe I can get somebody who, I do know somebody there, but not directly. So maybe I can send a link and say, hey, take a look at this and see what you think.
I'd greatly appreciate it.
So cool.
Well, I think I've got an example of just about every jacket that was ever made and every color that was ever made. So they have a large selection to choose from.
Wow. Okay. You want to show more?
What I want to talk about now is there were women who were excited about seeing these jackets, but would never make it to Mexico or to the stores that sold these jackets in the United States, because most of those were in Los Angeles. And LA had a couple of stores on Wilshire Boulevard, and they sold these to the stores at $9.50 wholesale. And then they went on sale to the public retail at $16.95. And that sounds like, not much money, but back in the early 40s, that was over $100. So in order to satisfy women who could never purchase these jackets or go to Mexico, McCall's created this pattern number. Let me get my fingers out of the way here. 1399, and it came out in 1947, I believe. And this enabled the women to create their own jackets. And McCall's Needlework magazine promoted this pattern, and then they would have women send in their pictures of the jackets that they made. And so there were all kinds of women that had the freedom to do what they wanted with these jackets. This is one where whoever the maker was, she added fringe on the shoulders and the sleeves to make it look more Western. And on the back of the collar. And I've never seen this before. I had to acquire this jacket because it was so unusual. But when I show you these few examples, you're going to see the same pattern that these women had used from the McCall's 1399. Now, this is another example, more elaborate. They used more embroidery, more of the patterns all over the jacket. And then they use this unusual, I don't exactly know what you would call this type of embroidery here. They used rainbow colors, and it's very elaborate. It's not the typical cross stitching that you see on the regular jackets. And again, you see this pattern of the man pulling a stubborn donkey and a lady and pots and palm trees. And it's a beautiful chocolate colored brown. Now this one is so off the charts. Someone, I can't imagine the amount of time that was put into this jacket. They added figures and things that were not in the original pattern, but it is just incredible what this person did. On the sleeve, you see there's like a NW, and I'm guessing that that's maybe the initials of the maker.
I would think so.
But this is just incredible, the work that was done on this jacket.
It's always hand embroidered, or were they ever using machines to do the embroidery?
It was all hand embroidered. So the time that was spent on that was months, maybe even years, I don't know. It was just spectacular. I'm going to show you now some outliers on the jackets. Now, typically you've seen village scenes of, you know, people in sombreros and ladies with baskets. This one is different in that it's an equestrian of a charro jumping a fence. I've not seen this pattern anywhere before. So I always tried to buy something of a pattern that, you know, was not with the regular village scenes whenever I've seen one. Now, this is another style of jacket that you're going to see maybe on Etsy or eBay. It's by a company called La Muchacha that was in, I believe, Georgia. And they must have designed these and imported them. They always show this kind of chenille embroidery of a sombrero and some fruit, a cacti, an agave. It's always the same pattern with the fruit on the sleeves. Now this one was lined on the cuffs. And I have to say that I made a slight change to it. I wanted it to be more Western. It had kind of dull plastic buttons, and I took those off and put 3 concho buttons on to kind of liven it up and make it look more Western. Now this is another outlier. It's a short sleeve jacket, which I have not seen before. And this is unusual in that it's another store, and this one is in El Paso. It says Sprenger's Gifts and Novelties, El Paso, Texas. So it's very rare that actual stores where labels were still attached to these items. This is another unusual jacket where they've used corduroy and the collars and facing the open front here. And it's a very beautiful, unusual color, a beautiful kind of golden taupe color.
Now, how can you tell when it's made with the McCall's pattern by an American woman versus made by a Mexican woman in Mexico?
Well, the McCall's pattern, let me just grab one of these here. They will always feature this design. You'll always see the palm tree, the man pulling on a donkey, this woman, the front of these jackets. If I show you the pattern again, you'll see these same designs on the front.
But the woman who made this pattern could embroider whatever she wanted.
Exactly.
She didn't have to do those designs. Is there something about the shape of the pieces that's classically Mexican versus an American interpretation? Or you find the shapes of the jackets are comparable?
I would say the shapes are comparable. There was more of a straight line shoulder that they used in the mid to the later 50s. Now this conceivably could have been made by an American woman, but I don't think that, you know, she would have come up with these exact patterns. I mean, it's possible, but this is very different from the other patterns that you've seen.
So you're really basing it all on the embroidery, not the structure of the garment.
That's correct, yes. This is another unusual one where you see a buck and then an albino doe. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen a jacket with, you know, just large creatures like this. So added to my collection, it had to be. And again, you see primarily the greens, the blues, the reds. So it's unusual to find the blacks and the yellows and the ivories.
Jackie, you hear that? Hers was ivory, my roommate.
This, I have no idea where this one came from. Somebody had a free form here. They had heart-shaped pockets. This placard here, front placard. And then they made like, almost like a belt that goes around the back. Again, with the village scenes, but I just have never seen anything that looked like a belt like that before. This one is very unusual in that it's highlighting the charro with his scarf and his sombrero. So this is more of a, let's say, a horseman's style of jacket with a downturned horseshoes with a horse head in between. And the sombreros on the pockets. This again is one of my favorite jackets. It's almost a modernist design. It has these donkeys against an ivory background. Kind of a simple design, but very effective with the birds flying, the blackbirds. The appliques are beautiful on this jacket. This is an incredible appliqued jacket. One of the best that I've seen. And it really fills the jacket with contrasting white. Again, this is a take on the 40s jacket with the palm tree. It doesn't have the moon and stars, but it has an unusual cuff too, which, let me get it here.
Yeah, the sleeve is particularly attractive, I think.
This is another incredible
Mm.
piece of handiwork. It's one featuring musicians. And the needlework is really intricately done. It looks like they've used silk thread here.
These are unbelievable, unbelievable.
This one I purchased from a woman in England. She said that her mother bought it in the 1950s at a resort in Pascuaro Lake in Mexico. And Pascuaro Lake had a lot of fishermen that used these big butterfly nets. And so that's representative of Lake Pascuaro. Again, it's the work on this is just mind-blowing. Now this is the super duper one of them all. This is someone who did the floating gardens of Xochimilco. So they've done all this water, these swans, the boatmen with their floating boats. And the back is just incredible on this. Again, they've used, I believe, silk threads, not the wool embroidery.
No, a vest.
Yes, this was also a popular item. This one in particular, again, they do the cross stitching. And this is probably late 50s because it's, I believe this was hand embroidered, but they use the silk threads on it instead of the wool threads.
Would this be worn by a man, do you think?
Oh no, this is a woman's vest. And the backs were always plain. Now this is an unusual piece. It's actually a wrap. That comes to a triangle and wraps around your shoulders. And this is from the 1940s.
This is really great for knitters to get some ideas because people are embroidering on hand knit garments now. I mean, they have been for 100 years, but the shape of this, any knitter could replicate this square with two rectangles attached to it to get a shawl that probably fits really well.
And you know, it has the wool fringe
Mm-hmm.
on the ends. And this is the only one I've ever seen. Possibly others exist, but this is the only one I've ever found. Now they also, in the late 50s, moved into doing these ponchos that had a collar. It looks to be possibly polyester or silk fringe. And orange is a very unusual color. It's, you rarely see this color. They also made children's jackets. Again, this has the cockfight here. So they obviously weren't concerned about that for their children or for the tourist children. And this is another design for a child. A little bit different from the others that you've seen. It has the little chickens here, more whimsical.
And the shape is different. It's not so boxy. It's a little flare, A-line-ish.
Yes, and it's a beautiful kind of a golden yellow color. That is the extent of the jackets.
Well, just a minute. You have not said anything about the one you're wearing, which is the creme de la creme.
This is probably mid to late 50s. Again, it's the contrasting appliques. It has a collar, so it's not from the 40s. But I've always enjoyed the contrasting appliques with the darker colors.
I like the one you're wearing very much, and I also like the black one for the same reason. Simpler, less gaudy, if you will, and appliqued as opposed to embroidered. I hadn't seen those really before, and they happen to appeal to me a lot. I have my little appliques. Did you notice?
I did.
This is not Mexican. It's like got a Hawaiian theme, but and it's a sweater. It's not felt.
Well, you know, I just love embroidery. So I have not only Mexican embroidery, I have, you know, Eastern European embroidery. I just love, I'm not an embroiderer myself, but I appreciate all the work that goes into these garments. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to show you just three examples of the circle skirts that these jackets can be worn with. Now this is Aztec design with I can't even tell you the number of sequins that have been put on this skirt. And I'll try to show you all the stitching of all these sequins. It was just, I can't imagine being the woman whose job it is to put these sequins on. This is another style, kind of a window pane of various village scenes and architecture and plants. When you wear these skirts with these jackets, it's just incredible. And then this is a skirt made for I would guess maybe a toddler. And again, it features the cockfight on there. But just, you know, they're just beautiful. And how I got interested in these things, my husband and I, we were in Oakland in 1985, and we saw these posters that were put on telephone poles and other things about a vintage fashion show at the Oakland Coliseum. And so we were looking for something interesting to do. So we went to this show, and it just blew me away. I couldn't believe the things that were for sale, stuff that you would find in museums. I didn't know that you could actually buy these things. There were probably 200 vendors. And this woman was walking around with a Mexican circle skirt and one of these embroidered tourist jackets. And I just fell in love with that look. I mean, it was just so outstanding that that's what got me started. I bought my first jacket and skirt there and continued on from there. And having lived in Tucson, there were several really great back then vintage clothing stores, and these jackets and skirts would eventually come in there. But, you know, I've looked all over the country. I found many of them in California at antique stores, or, you know, you go to an antique fair and someone might have a jacket or a skirt. So I've collected them from all over. And then, of course, eBay and Etsy helped me build up my collection also. So I purchased items from Canada, England, as I mentioned before. The more unusual ones were the one like from Lake Pascuaro. So it's just been kind of a passion for me, and I love wearing them. I always bought them in my own size. So if ever I sell any of my collection, it's got to be someone who is the same size as I am.
It's such a fascinating thing to collect, and I was interested to know what possessed you to start this collection. And you said 35 years ago, Oakland. My experience as an Art Deco lover is that the people in the San Francisco Bay Area are very, very into vintage, followed by LA, Chicago, and New York. But something about the people from San Francisco, I participated many years ago, must be, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, maybe longer, in the Art Deco World Congress that took place here in New York. And people had come from all over the world. Australia also really big into vintage, and the UK. But the people from San Francisco had the most incredible outfits, complete with, you know, hats and handbags and all the accessories, the authentic shoes from the period, luggage, everything, followed by the people from LA. But that's Art Deco. Now you're talking about Mexico. Well, Mexico shares a border with California. So I think the Southern Californians, it's really easy for them. Maybe it's like an hour drive from LA or something. I mean, it's pretty quick hop down there to get to Tijuana. And then, of course, you could go deeper in. But I don't know so much about the Texas border, you know, what tourism was like going over that, but for sure, California. So, you know, it's not a big surprise to me that Oakland would have had a lot to get you started in that vintage realm. One thing that I own, I bought in San Francisco, which is a beautiful vintage dress, 1930s or 40s. So yeah, I mean, for people who want to be collecting vintage, it is a happening part of the United States for that. Well, it's just such an interesting thing. I have never encountered anybody else who collects this specific niche. And it seems like you have a very broad interest. It's not just like only the ones with the dancing couple. It goes beyond that. And not just applique, but embroidered. So, you know, really, really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Oh, my pleasure. And
I want to ask you though, before I say goodbye, I want you to hold on, because when you showed one thing, it reminded me of a piece of jewelry that I have. Hang on one second. I'm gonna
Sure.
go into my jewelry box and I'll be right back. I wasn't sure I was gonna be able to find it. Oh, whoops.
oh, that's great. Yes.
So it has that little gourd in, like it's a three-dimensional thing on the donkey, just like, I think it was the first jacket you showed us where you said those were raised. And immediately I thought of this, I hadn't pulled it out, but I do have a couple of other Mexican pieces of jewelry that I just wanted to like slip in here as long as we're doing show and tell. These are
Oh,
the
is that
traditional Tosco silver earrings. I bought a pair when I was there. Unfortunately, I lost one. The ones that I bought for myself, I was a teenager, were smaller than this, and I really preferred them. But I had to replace them since I didn't have a complete pair. So I own those. And then my aunt and uncle went to Mexico. I don't know exactly when, but since she passed away in 1964, I think it had to be before that. And she was ill the last several years of her life. So I'm guessing that they went in the 50s. She brought back this bracelet, which is another really classic Mexican design. I myself found this on eBay years ago, the storytelling bracelet. Have you
oh,
seen
yeah.
these? So you
That's
have the burro and you have a guitar.
and sombrero with some cactus behind it, and little hacienda, and then the couple. So I really love that.
Well,
And
you know, a few modern brands have recreated these jackets. Ralph Lauren did a jacket that had mostly florals on it, and Double D Ranch, which is my favorite brand, they did a suede version of McCall's patterns, as well as the dancing couple. And Scully did one in leather of the dancing couples on the back. Also, Lucky Brand several years ago did hoodies with a Mexican village scene embroidered on the back, and then the front patch pockets and such. They did that one in orange, ivory, and black.
it's really fun. I'm sure that people are knitting things with these kinds of motifs on them as well. One other thing, I think, I'm not sure, that it might have been purchased by my aunt in Mexico. It's a skirt. It's one of these wrap skirts that, look at how teeny the waist is.
I know. You have to be
She was
wild.
very thin, and I couldn't find them, but I have a pair of fabric shoes
Mhm.
that she bought at the same time that are covered in this. So
Wonderful.
it must have been like a complete set, but I never saw any embroidered blouse. Like, I don't know what she was wearing on top. Maybe it's just a plain black sweater or something.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a really fun, festive, colorful thing to wear. And I'll see if I can, shop this around for you, because I'd love to have your stuff visit New York.
Thank you. I would really love to see it displayed. I think it would be a big draw. It's really spectacular, particularly under lights, to see these different works of art. I consider them works of art.
They are. I somehow read, or somewhere read, that some Mexican restaurants display them as art on the wall.
Hmm.
Well, they're extraordinary. And as you pointed out again and again, the time it takes to do this work, that has to be recognized. And it's always done by women, I'm sure. Right? I mean, men were not sitting and embroidering, were they?
I can't believe that they would be. Now, as far as the skirts were made, there were male artists. What they did with the skirts is they had this huge wooden round board, and they pinned the fabric to this board. Because the designs are symmetrical, you wonder, how did they do this? And so the artists would just turn this board and paint the skirts. And then after they dried, the sequins people would come in and put the sequins in. And often the skirts are signed by the artist. And those are the more valuable ones if it has a signature on it.
Well, that seems like a harder thing. I love so much that you're wearing your collection.
That's what I bought it for, not to just stick in a closet, never to see the light of day. I try to wear them. And I actually, when we lived in Tucson, my husband and I were walking towards a restaurant, and this homeless man came up to me and he said, "Ma'am, I just want to tell you, I have never seen an outfit like this, and it's just beautiful." And so minded homeless guy. I said, "Well, sir."
Aficionado of good taste. He might have been earlier in his life, you don't know. Fell on hard times. Wow, that's so sweet, and that's such a beautiful place to end. This was really a delightful hour or so spent with you to see these things. Thanks for collecting them. Thanks for sharing them.
Oh, thank you for doing the podcast on them. It's a delight for me to be able to share these works of art with the public.
Oh, isn't that sweet? Thank you so much, Kathryn.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You joined the Air Force when?
Right out of high school. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college, so I joined the Air Force to get the GI Bill. And I told my recruiter I want to be a spy. And he said, oh, okay. Oh, we've got those kind of jobs there. So I was stationed in northern Japan. It was during the Vietnam War. I was the 10th woman. This job opening had just opened up. So I was the 10th woman on a base of 3,000 men to go there. And we listened in on Chinese and Russian communications. I had wanted to be a linguist, a Russian linguist, but they didn't have any openings then. The only openings they had was that you would fly over Vietnam, and they wouldn't let women in combat zones then. So my basic training, and not too many people know about this, is we had beauty consultants come in for us. They didn't really know what to do with us. I never fired a weapon. We never did an obstacle course. They had consultants come in and show us how to wear our hair, how to do our nails, how to walk with a purse on our arms. They even had a model of a penis and showed us about condoms, that for you girls that are going overseas, these men see prostitutes and you might catch something. So you need to know how to protect yourself. So it was a very different type of basic training than what they have today.
I'm sorry I never asked my stepmother about things like that. She was a nurse in the Army in World War II. And it was mostly men. But I never heard her describe any of that, how to dress and how to put on makeup or anything. She might have been a little bit older than you because she already had gone through some college and nursing school.
Well, the other thing that I never worried about anybody harassing me sexually or worried about rape. I mean, there was a separate women's Air Force then. We were called WAF, which was Women's Air Force. But the men were very protective of us. I mean, if anyone even made a comment, they would really get on their case. So I never felt threatened in any way. And I don't know what happened, why. I think since they combined the men and women together, that created a problem with all the sexual assault these women are facing today.
Well, so interesting. This is what I mean. Sometimes after the conversation, the after party can be very interesting. Who knew? Wow. So do you speak Japanese?
I speak it enough to get us around, to make reservations, order food, get on trains. I mean, I can't really say that I can carry on a lengthy conversation with anyone, but when you're in the hinterlands, you need to be able to know some Japanese, because they may know some English, but they won't speak it with you. They're too afraid to. And they're really surprised when you know Japanese.
I'll bet. It's part of the reason why I haven't gone there, because I like to travel independently. And I'm afraid to go to places where I don't know the language, because if something were to happen, you need to be able to explain what's going on. And you can see my personality. I like to talk.
My husband's daughter went there recently. She's a researcher for NASA, and she didn't speak any Japanese. She went for some kind of a conference, and she said she used Google Translate, which worked pretty well. I've never used that, so I don't know how it works.
Okay, I might try that before I would venture out.
Into Google Translate, and then it comes up with the Japanese translation to show somebody. And then they speak it, and then it's supposed to come back up in English back to you.
My friend who has the Mexican tourist jacket, she's been to Japan numerous times. She and her husband go on their own, and they just feel very comfortable wandering around and taking trains and going wherever they want to go. They've never gone with a tour.
Oh, we always go on our own. My husband just turned 80. So, but he's a robust 80, as the doctor said. It's the only difficulty is you can't read anything, you know, because it's all in kanji. But when you order food, they have those plastic models of the food, and I just copy down the kanji on a notebook, you know, little notebook, and show the waitress, and you know, so you always get the food that you want.
Okay, I'll remember that in case I am fortunate enough to get there. Ciao, or I don't know how you say that in Japan. Japanese.
Sayonara.
Sayonara, of course. I didn't have my right thinking cap on. I know arigato, and I know sushi. Negamaki, kasamaki. Important words. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.